Baruch Hashem Yahweh. This week's Torah portion is from Bereshit, Genesis, chapter 28, verse 10, and extends through to Bereshit, Genesis 32 and verse 3. Vayetze, in the Hebrew, Vayetze. Vayetze, in the Hebrew. You okay back there? Perfect, perfect. Now Yaakov went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran. So there we have the title of our Torah portion, going out. He went out, Vayetze, again coming to us from Bereshit chapter 28 and verse 10. I want to quote and reference the classics today, from Professor Nogel's research to Marvin Pope and Eitz Yosef and Westerman. But what I'm going to find today as we dig deep into this Torah portion, I know that I've just discovered over the years and years and years of studying the Torah that those complex and complicated texts that so many times we were trained to dismiss as fables or magic, or we just set aside that we couldn't quite figure it out. I have wanted to pursue with the earnest belief that Yahweh's word is perfection and that everything can be answered. There's no magic. There's nothing that is unexplainable, but it can be explained through the text itself. And so this week, this is a power-packed Torah portion, and it goes across many, many chapters. We have Yaakov's vow at Bethel. We have Jacob meets Rachel, and I could camp out right there in chapter 29, and I could come up with a great midrash there on the flocks by the water and the sheep, and we could apply it all to Yeshua and paint a beautiful messianic picture, and it could warm our heartstrings. It really could, and I've done that in years past. We could talk about DNA and the book of life and the angels ascending and descending. And I've done that in years past. And then we come into the latter part of chapter 29, and we see where Yaakov marries Leah, Jacob marries Leah and Rachel. And then we see the children of Jacob, and you can go into the names of the children of Jacob and Leah's children, and you can look at all of their Hebrew names, and they spell out and paint a wonderful picture and a wonderful story of the redemption that is in Yeshua. I mean, there's so much here, but what I really wanted to camp out on was the complexity of the text. Because in those complex texts, we can find truly, if we dig deep, we can truly find the answers that are so many times glossed over, that are explained away as fables or magic, or, well, you know, I'm okay with not quite understanding it. Well, I'm not, and I want to dig deep. And as I look around and I look around in the world today, I truly see that the world is moving in a fast pace of globalism, and it's easy to write people like myself and many of you guys off as conspiracy theorists when we talk about the New World Order and the Illuminati and things like that. But if you are oblivious to the global elite and to the plans of what's going on, then I would say that you would be asleep at the wheel. Because I look around, and even in the architecture and the monuments, the construction of skyscrapers and the obelisks that appear and are appearing more and more, these phallic symbols that pop up. I mean, when you look on a church steeple, where does this come from? Why are all of these obelisks placed throughout the world? Why did they ship Cleopatra's Needle from Egypt to the River Thames? I mean, why do they do these things? Why do they build these things in prominent places? Because ultimately, brethren, everything that you see that the New World Order or other religions take is a perversion of the truth. It's a perversion and a flaunting and a mocking of biblical truth. Many of the things that you see, whether it be the chakras in foreign religions, where do they come from? Again, a perversion of the truth. Many years ago, I did a teaching on the showbread and the showbread and the loaves and how that related to the temple and the body. But again, these chakra points, where do they come from? Well, it's a perversion of biblical truth, talking about the temple showbread. And today, when we see these phallic symbols, when we see the construction of these obelisks and where they are placed, again, it is a massive perversion and a joke on those dumb sheep that are asleep and are being led to the slaughter. So I want to look at today biblical truth, and I want to go into the complexity of the text, and we are going to look at the flock of Yaakov, that spotted and speckled flock, because ultimately we are living in an age where there is a regathering of the flock of Jacob. And this account is really about the idea of Yaakov, Jacob, beating Laban at his own game. And you and I need to be able to beat the New World Order, the Illuminati, and the globalists at their own game. We do. Because we are not going to be lemmings. We are not going to be dumb sheep that just want to pretend we're going to go on some fantasy trip to heaven. We need to wake up and smell the New World Order, and it stinks. It truly stinks. Because this account records how Jacob schemed Laban out of his share of animals by altering the breeding pattern of Laban's flocks. Jacob does this by placing a series of sticks in the ground near the watering troughs. And consequently, the size of Jacob's herd increases, doesn't it? It increases. Ultimately, this week's Torah Parsha teaches us how to come out from under the slavery of Laban or the Illuminati agenda by what's called in the Hebrew midah keneged midah. And it's the single most fundamental axiom, moral axiom in the Torah. What does that mean? Midah keneged midah. Measure for measure. Measure for measure. The single most fundamental moral axiom in Torah. What we do will be done to us. Bereshit, Genesis 9:6. He who sheds the blood of a man, by man his blood shall be shed. Midah keneged midah. Those who deceive, they shall be deceived. Those who slander will themselves be slandered. Those who judge harshly will themselves be judged harshly. And this fundamental biblical reality should give us all pause before we listen, and should give us all pause before we speak. Because it's the fear of Yahweh that will give you the wisdom and the visions of Jacob. Because as Laban manipulated Jacob, midah keneged midah, Jacob now manipulates the flock for his wages and his freedom. Measure for measure. Let's go to chapter 29 and verse 25. And it came to pass that in the morning, see, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, what is this that you have done to me? Did I not serve you for Rachel? Why then have you deceived me? It's a precise mirror image of the scene in chapter 27, where Jacob pretends to be Esau. It's a mirror image. Jacob posed as the older brother when Isaac was in the dark. So here, Rachel and Leah exchange positions when Jacob is in the dark. The Torah gives us 3 linguistic clues right here that take us back to that very event. Bereshit, chapter 29, Genesis 29, 25. Why did you deceive me? In the Hebrew, Ramah or Rimatani, the very same word Isaac uses to describe Jacob's behavior regarding the birthright of Esau in chapter 27, verse 35. Your brother came in deceit, Mirmah, the very same word. You see, the word Laban uses to describe Rachel is Tezreah. Again, this word appears in Rebekah's oracle about the boys struggling within her womb in Genesis chapter 25, verse 23. The elder will serve the younger, Tezreah. Because Laban tries to justify the deception with some very well-chosen words. It is not done in our place to give the younger before the Bachor, the firstborn. Hinting that he knew what Yaakov had done in another place. Right? Very well chosen. It's not done in our place, hinting what he knew that he had done in another place. Right there in the text. You see, the Midrash goes like this. In the morning, and behold, it was Leah. And he said to her, deceiver, daughter of a deceiver, did I not call you Rachel last night? And you answered me? She replied, Is there a master without students? Did your Abba not call you Esau? And you answered him? Measure for measure. So in reality, now Brother John has really been working hard on our website and in the back end of the ministry with so many things. And he did speak to me and say, I think we need to have an out there section. This week's teaching is definitely okay. It's gonna go into that section. Okay, just to give you guys, in case I get people looking at me crazy, I'm warning you. In reality, Reuben, Leah's firstborn, is the product of what should rightly have been Joseph's. We are Joseph, are we not? The house of Joseph. Thus, you're going to see, after the restoration, Reuben loses the leadership and Joseph is restored as the oldest son. You see, men's plans for Israel, for Jacob, men's plans for Israel's enslavement are eventually turned around in the final days of Joseph. And I believe we are in the final days of Joseph. And we have got to get out from the enslavement. Reuben is symbolic of Zionist Israel being deceived. And also deceiving man. And other politicians and are man deceived by Zionist Israel. The tribe of Reuben didn't actually enter into the promised land proper, and neither has or will the Zionist state gain a proper foothold in the land itself. You see, Reuben received an inheritance, but his inheritance was on the other side of the Jordan. You see, don't stay under the power of man's deception regarding the state of Israel. You'll end up on the outside of the land looking in and wondering how all the blessings passed you by. Deuteronomy chapter 29, verse 29, it is written, "The secret things belong to Yahweh. Yahweh our Elohim. But those things which are revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may do all the words of this law." Now there's this Hebrew word that we're going to be seeing that is embedded throughout the whole text. It's the Hebrew word tson, and it means flocks. Tson, flocks. And it occurs frequently in our text, and often in our text it occurs without a modifier, meaning it can get quite perplexing. Whose flocks are we talking about? Read the text. I mean, is it Jacob's flocks? Is it Laban's flocks? Is it a combination of both of their flocks? This Hebrew word appears, but it appears without a modifier. Oftentimes, you're not sure if you're honest with yourself. Because we like to pretend that we figured everything out. And I haven't figured everything out. And I'm like, I've had to reread this text so many times this week. I'm like, now which flock? Whose flock? And is this Jacob's flock? Is this Laban's flock? Are we talking about the combination of the flocks? It's this Hebrew word here, tson, flocks. And it is very perplexing to whose flocks are actually being discussed, if you're honest with yourself. Are we talking about those of Jacob? Are we talking about those of Laban? Or the combined pool of both of their flocks? Then, to complicate matters further, you've got 5 different adjectives that are used for the multicolored animals, for which today the precise meanings aren't even available. They're not. They're very obscure. And finally, if you're not yet confused, the final factor which renders the passage enigmatic right here is the flexibility of the Hebrew prepositions employed in this whole account. Meaning, it's very difficult to define precisely the actions that are being involved. It's really like being a detective on a sheep farm. It really is. And that's what we're going to be. A bunch of detectives on a sheep farm. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 30, verse 25. "And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Yaakov said to Laban, 'Send me away, that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service that I have done for you.' And Laban said to him, 'Please, if I have found favor in your eyes, stay. For I have learned by experience that Yahweh has blessed me for your sake. And he has said, appoint me my wages, and I will give it.' And he said to him, 'You know how I have served you, and how your cattle were with me. For it was little which you had before I came, and it is now increased by a multitude. And Yahweh has blessed me since you came. And now, when shall I provide for my own Bayit also?' In verse 31, he said, 'What shall I give you?' And Yaakov said, 'You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep your flock. I will pass through all your flock today, removing from there all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and those shall be my hire. So shall my zeracha answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before your face. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted as stolen with me. So right here we see that Yaakov, Jacob, gives to Laban all the speckled and spotted goats and brown sheep to take 3 days' journey away. Because this really is an amazing deal for Laban. Because if you remove the spotted, speckled, ring-streaked and brown from the flock, what chance are you actually going to have of producing spotted, speckled, ring-streaked and brown from a now pure flock? Like kind after like kind, right? So Jacob had observed much through his 90 years of herding for his father Isaac and 14 years for his uncle Laban. Did Jacob not know about the structural molecule of DNA, in which the physical characteristics of the parents are transmitted to the children? Because he set himself up right here to lose, has he not? Or does he know so much more about DNA that he can affect its change through environmental factors? Because that's one way that we can look at this text. Now there's another way we'll get to, which I really like, but it's definitely out there. But I've got to work you guys into it slowly before we go and I play the wild card. So we're going to look at it this way first. You see, because DNA can be affected and changed by outside environmental factors, right? You can really mess with your DNA, and the New World Order is messing with your DNA through the water, through your diet. Let's pump you up and hop you up on prescription pills as they're trucking in loads of illegal drugs across the southern border, and we're sending troops to monitor poppy fields in Afghanistan, importing heroin from Afghanistan through the CIA. That's okay, but we're going to make sure that you have to have a prescription to go and get some pain pills when you hurt your back. So DNA can be affected through water, diet, medicine, stress, sin. Oh yes, your sin can really affect your DNA. Heavy metals, toxins, and pollutants. In fact, environmental changes can be transmitted through to the next generation. And that's how they lived so long back in the days of Noah, because the environment has changed so much. Look at verse 34. And Laban said, "See, I would it might be according to your word. This is a good deal for me." And he removed that day the male goats that were ring-streaked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white within it, and all the brown sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. And he set 3 days' journey between himself and Yaakov, and Yaakov fed the rest of Laban's flocks, and Yaakov took rods of green poplar. The Hebrew word there is libinah. It means it exudes a white, milky gum. And of hazel, and the Hebrew there is lutz, or almond, and then chestnut eights. And the Hebrew word there is armon. And he rounded white streaks in them and made the white appear that was in the rods. Let's look at these Hebrew words for these sticks. Luz. Of course, this is the almond used to improve fertility in the ancient Far East. And its aroma was often used in oil as an aphrodisiac. And it was sold throughout the spice markets in the Middle East. Then we come to the next word, arom, or chestnut. Now, drinking something that contains chestnut tannins could affect your genetic function. It's called epigenetics, the study of heritable changes in gene expression that occurs without a change in the DNA sequence. And there's a lot of study on this epigenetics in the field of prenatal nutrition. Now, our biblical narrative can be explained one way through the early nutritional influences on what's called the agouti gene that affects the coat color and fur color in sheep. You see, Yahweh's word makes sense. And as the doubters say, well, how, that's just a fable. Oh, well, that's just magic. That's just an ancient tale. I go to the text and I go, no, Yahweh's word is real and it speaks into our life today. It is living. Everything in here can be explained through his word itself. You don't even have to go outside of his word to explain his word, because his word explains itself. It's a dictionary for itself. It's a wonderful, wonderful, miraculous, supernatural, inspired book that has all of the answers to all of our problems. It has every solution for the crazy, insane generation told last week that we are now walking in. It truly does. And that helps me sleep at night. It really does. It really does. Because today we can understand that to corrupt the DNA can produce a mutation. And it's called cancer. Corrupted DNA through sin, through toxins, and through the influences of the New World Order. And a correlation has been made between esophageal or nasal cancer in humans and regular consumption of certain herbs with high tannin concentrations, like chestnut tannins. They could cause mutations that could actually be manifested as spotted skin color in Jacob's goats or his sheep. Because what would happen, the leaching of these highly water-soluble tannins from the decaying leaves or vegetation in the water troughs of the livestock would produce what is known as a black river, a black water river, where there's the presence of tannins or humic acid in well water that can make it smell bad or even taste bitter. Now, there would also be free amino acids under the bark, methionine, choline, and fungi as filaments, and peeling the bark would make fungi available in the water for extraction, water extraction. Verse 38, and he set the rods, and he had rounded before the flocks in the gutters in the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink, and the flocks conceived before the rods, and brought out cattle ring-streaked, speckled, and spotted. Verse 40, and Yaakov did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks towards the ring-streaked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and did not put them in Laban's cattle. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Yaakov laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. You see, the aroma, it's possible that the aroma from the fresh bark of the rods of the trees of the almond could have caused the livestock to go into heat and thus become more fruitful. The tannins leaching into the water trough of the sheep and the goats would be ingested by the livestock, and it would go into their systems and could cause actual specific changes within their DNA, mutations. And of course, those mutations would allow for the offspring to be spotted or striped or black or brown. Just like formaldehyde causes DNA mutations through inhalation. Why not put it in your toothpaste? Sounds like a good idea if you're a dumb sheep. The aroma of fresh peel of the chestnut trees caused similar effects as the animals in heat inhaled the chemicals in the hair. This is one way to scientifically look at the text, and I like it. Verse 42, But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in, so the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Yaakov's. And the man increased exceedingly, and much cattle he had, and female avadim, male avadim, camels and donkeys. You can explain the text just through science, through mutations and looking at the bark, the chemicals, DNA. And it's amazing just to dig and scratch the surface there. But as I look around and I see the world that I live in, I look around and see that I am of the flock of Yaakov, Jacob. That we are in that generation when Yahweh is gathering us. And I walk down on the State Street down here, and all of a sudden there's a park, and then whoom, up we go. There's an obelisk. What's that doing there? I got back from Washington, D.C. in the summer, and there they go again, another one. All these phallic symbols. Off we go to church with the phallic symbol, the steeple on top of its head. What is this obsession with the phallus? What is the obsession? It's everywhere. And I look and I see these globalists running around. Well, I don't see him, thank goodness, running around naked down at Bohemian Grove every summer with the phalluses down there. And these are global leaders that go to this place. The Bilderbergs. And I look into our text and I wonder what's going upon the rods. So now we're going to go a little bit out there, because this makes a lot more sense to me. Let's look at the scenario in Bereshit, Genesis chapter 30, verse 32. Let me pass through your whole flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted lamb, every dark-colored lamb, and every spotted and speckled she-goat, and such shall be my wages. You see, we have to slow it down. We have to slow it down and not monk with the text. Because we tend to, myself included, just speedily read through this text. I had to really, really slow it down. Now, notice what it doesn't say. It doesn't say, as we've all been taught, that Jacob received all the spotted, speckled, and dark-colored stock, does it? Doesn't say that. Look at the careful wording involved in the text. You see, Jacob's request leaves to Laban all the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored ewes. You see that? Jacob's request leaves to Laban all the speckled, spotted, and dark-colored ewes, and all the spotted and speckled he-goats. Verse 35. But that same day he, Laban, removed the striped and spotted he-goats, and all the speckled and spotted she-goats, every one that had white on it, and all the dark-colored sheep, and left them in the charge of his sons. I can see all of your brains just working. I can see veins pumping. And you really have to think about this stuff. Now, Laban decides to jack Jacob up. I mean, he really does. He singles out for himself all the goats that might produce speckled, that might produce spotted, and dark-colored young for Jacob. And Laban takes them from Jacob's stock, but not from his own stock. Verse 40 informs us that Jacob does possess a few oddly colored animals among Laban's flock. And Yaakov did separate the lambs and set the faces of the flocks towards the ring street, and all the brown in the flock of Laban. And he put his own flocks by themselves, and he did not put them in Laban's cattle. So Jacob ends up with speckled and dark-colored he-goats, striped and brown she-goats, which must belong to Laban, right? speckled and spotted male lambs, and speckled and spotted ewes, as well as some dark-colored lambs, presumably of both sexes. From this pool, he's got to produce his wages. From this pool, he's got to produce his wages. Verse 36. But he put a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob, while Jacob was pasturing the rest of Laban's flock. Verse 39, and the flocks conceived before the rods and brought out cattle ring-streaked, speckled, and spotted. Now notice, this is different than verse 41, excuse me. Because in verse 39, there is no mention of the Hebrew word ayin, eyes, is there? Now in verse 41 there is, but in verse 39, there is no mention of ayin, eyes or seeing in the text. Because Bible commentators tell you that these animals saw the rods. But in verse 39, it's not in the text. Ayin is not in the text. And it came to pass, whenever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Yaakov laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. That's verse 41. Now we're going to look at the preposition Aleph Lamed. I got to focus. All right. I'm not that smart. Yaakov laid the rods before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. Verse 41. But now we're going to look at the preposition Aleph Lamed, or El. And it's often translated as to or toward. But it can also mean on. And here's the kicker. This is where we're going into weird. On, against, or upon. I'll give you some examples. Bereshit, Genesis chapter 4, verse 8. Cain rose up, Aleph Lamed, against Abel. Shemot, Exodus chapter 29, verse 12. Then pour out the rest of the blood upon, Aleph Lamed, El, the base of the altar. Vayikra, Leviticus 5, verse 9. And what remains of the blood shall be poured out against El, Aleph Lamed, the base of the altar. 1 Samuel 5, 4. Dagon's hands and head were cut off and laying upon, Aleph Lamed, the floor. And finally, 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 23, he smote him on the belly. So there we can see through the text that the preposition Aleph Lamed that is translated in our text as toward or to can mean on or upon, which is a game changer. Now this is where we're going out there. Is it possible that Genesis chapter 30, verse 39, depicts Jacob using the poplar rod not as a fertility symbol or an aphrodisiac that we just discussed, but something else, rather a type as phallus, phallax? Jacob allowed only the animals that he didn't want to sire offspring to become heated upon the rods. There's no magic here. The ones that he didn't want to bring forth offspring, he sent them ahead that they would heat upon the rods, therefore not producing offspring, because he knows all about sheep farming and the methods of procreation or mating. That they became heated upon Aleph Lamed, the rods. You see, Jacob uses them to alter the breeding pattern at Laban's expense. And veterinarians know that this stuff works. They've even come up with a device. It's called the chin ball mating device. Hosea, the prophet Hosea, he even makes the connections between the rod and the phallus. Listen to this. Hosea chapter 4, verse 10. Truly they shall eat, but not be sated. They shall be fornicate, but not be satisfied, because they have forsaken obeying Yahweh. Fornication, wine, and new wine take the mind of my people, because it consults the rod, Machel, its phallus directs them. Even Hosea sees the correlation. Add to this that the text states only the females of the flock, verse 38, their mating occurred when they came to drink. And where were the rods placed? Where they went to drink. You see, the animals brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted young. The description of these three colors of stock, striped, speckled, and spotted young, revealed to us by the missing color of stock, which were the dark-colored she-goats, that the stock that mated on the poplar rods must have been Laban's dark-colored she-goats. And they didn't therefore bring forth any offspring. You deceive me. You trick and measure for measure. Look at chapter 30, verse 40. Aleph Lamed. But Yaakov dealt separately with the sheep. He made these animals face the striped and all the wholly dark animals in Laban's flock. So he produced special flocks for himself, which he did not put with Laban's flocks. Now, this doesn't mean that Jacob faced the animals face to face. That's how we would normally read it. But again, I think that this means that Jacob selected what stock to put behind Aleph Lamed, behind Laban's animals, because that would be a position that would be more conducive for mating. This explains verse 40. He did not put these animals, Aleph Lamed, upon Laban's flock. He did not put these animals upon Laban's flock. No mating. You see, Jacob didn't do this with Laban's goats, but he made them to mate only with the rods. Verse 39. You see, Jacob exploited Laban's striped and dark-colored sheep to produce his wages. Jacob distinguishes from Laban's flock those sheep which bred early. The sheep that bred early would be stronger, right? So listen, Jacob distinguishes from Laban's flock those sheep which bred early, the stronger ones, and those which bred later, the weaker ones. And he allows only listen to this, and he allows only the stronger to mate against the poplar rods, which then would give Jacob an abundance of feeble stock. You got to think about that, don't you? He takes the stronger, those that mated early, and he makes them mate upon the poplar rods, therefore producing no offspring. The stronger actually become now weaker. He takes those that are late to go into heat, and he uses them for his flock, and they multiply. It's amazing. Jacob allows the stronger of Laban's animals to mate upon the rods so that they produce no young, all the while allowing the weaker of Laban's flock to produce without interruption. This naturally resulted in a proliferation of Laban's weaker animals. As Genesis 30 verse 42 informs us, the feeble ones went to Laban and the sturdy to Yaakov. It's amazing. He manipulates it to his advantage. Now we're going really out there. We're going to look at the word runnels. The Hebrew word for runnels is rachat. Resh, Chay. I can't even read my own writing here. Help me out here. I'm coming. Can't even read my own writing.
Rachat, the Reshe and the Tet.
Thank you. Resh, Chay, Tet. I might need to borrow his glasses. Rachat, the Resh, Chay, Tet, the runnels. Now this word is very rare. It occurs only 3 times in the whole Bible. Genesis 30, verse 41. It appears in Exodus 2:16, and very telling, Songs 7:6. And of these appearances, we've got to turn to Songs 7:6, because this is very telling because of its figurative use to describe a king's captivation with the locks of your hair or flowing hair. Now remember, runnels here is talking about where they place the rods in the flowing water, but it really is interlinked in Songs 7:6 with locks of your hair or flowing hair. Now we're getting kinky. Songs chapter 6 verse 5 describes the woman's hair by blending the imagery of sheep and flowing water. Your hair is a flock of goats streaming down from Gilead. You see it? Some of you know where I'm going here. The mention of a king in Song 7:6 can be applied to the tresses of hair, bound with ribbons rather than the king tangled in the tresses. So then in this verse is related to Songs 4:1, where the lady's hair is related to the action of moving water. So now we've got hair related to the action of moving water. Plus, we've got this sexual, sensual connotation of this word, because we can see by the fact that it appears in both a love song, Song 7:6, and in a mating scene, our text. So this is where children need to remove the room, because then Jacob quite redundantly says, oh, she's really going. That's great. Seamus, of course, is not going. Jacob then quite redundantly sets the rods which he peeled in the watering troughs. Now, if this word means only runnels, then the verse would place the runnels in the watering troughs. And the Hebrew word there is shoketh, shin kuf tav, shin kuf tav. But if flowing goat's hair is meant here, then what's going on? I think Jacob's getting kinky and creative. And he understands the mating of sheep. Because then that would mean that this passage would be describing how Jacob fashions models of goats' genitalia, or even entire stuffed animals, and places them in the shoketh, in the troughs. Why? You see, Jacob isn't unfamiliar with using goat's hair for manipulating things in his favor, is he? Right? I mean, he knows about this stuff. Jacob's pulled a fast one on Isaac by putting goat hair on his hands. Later, Jacob's sons tricked him into believing that his son Joseph was killed by painting his tunic with the blood of a he-goat. Later, we find that Judah is duped into sleeping with Tamar, and a kid from the flock of it is also involved. You see, Jacob's use of goat hair is an act of trickery, and it follows the scripturally established pattern. That he fashioned goats' genitalia or stuffed goats on which the flock would mount, thus producing no offspring in combination with mounting the rods. What a weirdo. But he had plenty of time on his hands and a vivid imagination.
He was making his exit plan.
Now we're going to get into Reuben and his love apples. In case you guys haven't had enough kinkiness for one day. Now my wife will just write all of this off as to my Englishness. You just English people are just weird. It's true. It's a definitely cultural thing. Reuben and his love apples and Laban's wedding trick. Because look at the rods, look at the love apples, look at the mandrakes, look at the stuffed animals, the goat's genitalia, it's everywhere. But look at Reuben's mandrakes now in chapter 30, verse 14. Let's see how the text compares the fertility of Jacob's flocks with the fruitfulness of his wives. Because that's what we're really going to see. The fruitfulness of Jacob's wives is compared to the fertility of his very flocks. And Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found love apples or mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his Emma Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's love apples." And Leah said to her, "Is it a small matter that you have taken my husband? And would you take away my son's love apples also?" And Rachel said, "Therefore, let him lie with you tonight for your son's love apples," those mandrakes. And Yaakov came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for surely I have hired you with my son's mandrakes." And he lay with her that night. And Elohim listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Yaakov a fifth son. So, I mean, if you don't think that this sheep and goat genitalia being fashioned in the rods, I mean, these guys, they definitely, know what they were doing. They knew what they were doing. And Leah said, "Elohim has given me my hire because I have given my maiden to my husband." And she called his name Yissachar. The mandrakes are eaten by the barren Rachel, but who conceives? Right? Leah. Now, the rods perform the same function. They're meant to inspire Laban's older animals to copulate, but to no effect. Null and void. Now, Jacob's manipulation of Laban's herds also mirrors Laban's deception of Jacob in Genesis 29 and Genesis 30. Just as Laban deceives Jacob into receiving Leah, and Leah in the Hebrew literally means strong wild cow. Is anyone, sorry, I forgot. You strong wild cow, you. Give me some of your mandrakes. Because Laban deceives Jacob into receiving Leah, literally the strong wild cow, instead of Rachel as his wife. It's the stronger of Laban's flocks which Jacob places before the impotent rods. So just as Laban tricks Jacob into receiving the fertile but weak-eyed Leah, Jacob offends Laban by allowing only the weaker of the flocks to reproduce. So the mandrakes and the rods actually serve a similar purpose, do they not? Bear in mind that Rachel means ewe lamb, and Leah, the wild cow. We can see in Jacob's manipulations of the flocks the illusion in the account of how Laban tricked Jacob into mating with Leah. It's amazing. You see, the meaning of their names. When Jacob first sets his eyes on the ewe lamb, Rachel, the Bible tells us that Rachel came with the sheep, portraying Rachel what? As a bleating lamb. You see? He sees her as a ewe lamb barring with the sheep. And similarly, Rachel and Leah are equated with flocks in Genesis 31 verse 4, where the text actually says, "And Yaakov called Rachel and Leah into the field unto his flock." And you could read it that way, but the word could just as easily be translated, "And Jacob sent and called to Rachel and Leah in the field to his flock," meaning Rachel and Leah are the flock. You see, in Genesis 29, Laban tricks Jacob into receiving the wild cow Leah instead of the ewe lamb Rachel. A manipulation of the flock. The manipulation of the flock will thus be measure for measure upon you. In Genesis 30, Jacob tricks Laban into giving him the lambs of his desire from the very item used in the trickery, a fresh rod of poplar, which plays on the name Laban, because the text goes out of its way to tell us that Jacob peeled what? Laban, white. It means white. Laban streaks in the rods so as to reveal their Labanness, their whiteness. Right there. Look at the similarity between Laban's underhanded switch of Jacob's wives, which occur where? At a drinking feast. Genesis 29 verse 22. And Jacob's switch of Laban's flocks, which occur where? When they come to drink. Both accounts also involve birthing. Also in chapter 30 verse 16, Leah hires Jacob with her mandrakes with the intention of conceiving. So twice in the story of Jacob's manipulation of Laban's flock are his animals referred to as wages, plus Jacob must serve Laban for his wives, just as he must serve Laban for his flocks, which are his wages. Then we're told that after the mandrake episode, Jacob sleeps with Leah at night. Now, when would the animals come for mating upon the rods? Nighttime is when most mating occurs among animal herds. Then to blow the roof off the whole thing, add to this the fact that Rachel is the younger and Leah is the older, which is an obvious parallel to his giving of the older bred animals to Laban while keeping the earlier, younger bred for himself. It's right there. I mean, there's so many parallels. And then when you tie it in with songs and how runnels can mean goat's hair and flowing water, and it's all about trying to manipulate the flock by taking Laban's stronger flock and having them mate upon the rods when they're in heat, or upon the dummies, so that they produce no offspring, whilst he then takes the weaker and then they become the stronger. I mean, it's all right there with a man who knows his way around a sheep farm. With a little kinkiness involved too, which, we've got the Mandrake episode anyway. 2 girls in a tent. I mean, it's kind of family tradition. Which brings me back to where I started. The New World Order. And how are you going to even get there? Well, follow me. Because we are so far removed, brethren. We are so far removed from Yahweh's creation. I mean, our meat comes in bloody plastic wrap. Our milk is a useless paste that's heated up to 161 degrees Fahrenheit. It's not good for your body. Our food is shifting to more and more GMO and pesticides. In short, we have no idea how to live as the flock of Jacob. We could never even pull this stuff off because we are so far removed from the flock of Jacob and animal husbandry. We have no idea. How do we live as Jacob? How do we live as Israel? You see, Yahweh is showing us through this week's Torah portion, as kinky as it may be in my interpretation, He's showing us how to get back on track and not get shafted. Did I really say that? I did. He's telling us how to get back on track with our families, our health, and our homesteads. Jacob shows us how to fight back at the Laban. Fight back at the Laban. The white pastiness of the New World Order, trying to make you all milky white, all the same, with no distinctions. How to beat them at their own game. How do you beat them at their own game? The Labanite, Illuminati, New World Order, 4 things. Family, food, farming, and firearms. Turn the tables on the Illuminati by using their own laws against them. Isn't that what Jacob did? He used Laban's own laws against him, whilst he lived under higher laws. And that's what we need to do. We need to use their own laws against them whilst ourselves living under higher laws. Meaning, tie the New World Order up in their ordinances and statutes. Tie the religious Pharisees up in their book of the law, carnal imposed ordinance and statutes, while you multiply exponentially in covenant Torah and constitution. Or if you're in the UK, live by covenant Torah and Magna Carta. You see, Satan knows that Yaakov, that Israel, once we wake up out of our slumbering spirits, once we wake up, Satan knows that we will have the ability to turn family, feeding, farming, and firearms to our own advantage and defeat the wiles of the Labanite Illuminati death agenda. You see, Israel uses a phallus phalanx. Jacob uses a phalanx to take control and gain victory. And here's the sick joke. We know when Satan encountered Yeshua, he wasn't short on Bible. He knew the verses, he knew the text, and he knew what was going on. And he quoted and perverted the very texts to Yeshua, yet Yeshua spoke the true text back to him. Satan knows this stuff, and if you don't think the Illuminati and the New World Order knows this book, then you're fooling yourself. Because Israel uses the phalanx to take control and gain victory and escape the slavery of Laban by putting the strong upon the phalanx. Satan knows how Israel escaped Laban's slavery. He knows it. He knows how Israel became prosperous in the flocks. So why do you think that Satan and the Illuminati use the phallus as a symbol? Because they use it to flaunt their domination, death cult status over the enslaved, the duped, and the dumb. You see, the phalanx symbol, they pervert the scriptures knowingly, laughing at us behind our backs as they put the strong upon the phallus. Kill Kennedy. What happens? Up goes the phallus behind the fence in Dealey Plaza. Once they corrupted and destroyed the people's government. And how did they do that? Through war. Of course, they always use war, the civil war. Once they destroyed and corrupted the people's government through the civil war, what did they build? The phallus, the Washington Monument, complete with ground-level sides of 666 inches long and a height of 6,666 inches. Give me a break. The Normandy Memorial is just outrageous. I mean, it's just outrageous. I mean, complete with a set of testicles. Complete with a set of testicles. They put 63 million strong upon the phallus. 63 million people killed because of the Second World War, which was set up by the bankers, the globalists, and those. 63 million they put upon the phallus, that they on the Normandy Memorial, they've got to put a set of testicles with it too. Outrageous, outrageous, right there before you. And then right here in Salem, Oregon, they celebrate the war machine with the new World War II memorial complete with the phallus. That's just recent. Why? Why? Because it's to mock right in your face. Because they want to enslave you when really the Bible tells you how to get rid and how to get out of slavery itself. And it's a twisting of the scriptural truth. To top it all, I have first-hand eyewitness accounts that FEMA, starting at LAX, is rolling out their Laban white cattle cars complete with built-in guillotines to trick the sheeple and thin the herd. When is Israel going to wake up and face up to the Labanite Illuminati agenda and take decisive action to multiply the flock of Jacob and get as far away from Laban as possible? 3 days? 3 days? Because when this goes down, you better believe that the first 3 days are going to be absolute hell. I mean, have you seen some of the YouTube videos of Black Friday? Animals. What have we become? Animals. Literally, those corrugated security doors that come down over stores, pushed through and bent as people trample and then fight and beat the tar out of each other over a flat screen TV. People dead. Outrageous. And that's just to save 25-30% on an electronic device or a piece of clothing. You see, you better believe that those first 3 days are going to be absolute hell. And we'd all better prepare for putting 3 days' journey of provision and distance between our flocks. Because ultimately, this week's Torah portion teaches us that we are the flock of Jacob. And what the Illuminati would try to use on you, measure for measure, Yahweh is with us. He is with the house of Jacob. And ultimately, he will restore the fortunes of Jacob. He will. No matter what the Labanite, Illuminati, milky paste try to do, Yahweh will restore the fortunes of Jacob. He will. As they want to thin the herd, Jacob has a plan. He has a plan, and he takes it and spins it and multiplies and is victorious. In an amazing, amazing way, the scriptural text teaches us how to survive. But not only how to survive, but how to thrive as believers. How to thrive as believers. That we have a hope, we have a future, and it's going to be one crazy journey, but it's going to be, wow. And who knows, you may even come across some mandrakes, Dane, along the way. I mean, you just never know who you may find in your Sukkot tent. But make sure you've got your headlight on and you can see what you're doing. Yahweh is awesome. And now my wife's looking at me through the door. That basically means, what an amazing Bible text. I love the word of Yahweh because you know what? As out there as this may be, you can find it in the text. You can go to Hosea, you can go to Songs, and you can see that this is just another interpretation of the text. But ultimately, Yahweh has a plan for us. The multiplicity and to escape from slavery. But we've got to be switched on and we've got to do our part. And what would be used against you, you've got to turn around, live by a higher law and tie them up with their own laws and ordinances as you live by a higher law, a higher code, and that is the key to the increase and the flight of the house of Jacob. Amen.